relied on pension obligation bonds to make almost $18 billion in actuarially required pension payments. So they borrowed to pay the costs. By the time the state income tax was increased in the General Assembly this past January, the state budget was so out of balance that the new tax revenues, they do little more than stabilize the state's operating budget. So here is the unavoidable, cold, hard truth. Unless a 25% state pension contribution level is maintained for the next 34 years, the state's pension obligations and unfunded liabilities will continue to escalate exponentially. And if the state had paid every year as it was supposed to, their payment is about 11.5%, and the 25% is the 13 or 14% that they need for those 35 years to get us, get the liability down. There is simply no easy answer for the state. Our leaders are our employees or annuitants. Our pension plans cannot earn their way out of financial stress. Furthermore, it's impossible for any rational person to believe that the state will contribute its 25% every year for the next 34 years to eliminate the funding deficiency. I don't know anybody who would believe that. Therefore, the only option left for policymakers appears to be a reduction in benefits. Now, lawmakers are also looking at other changes that will affect university employees and annuitants, including, and you know the list, increasing insurance contributions for employees, compelling retirees to pay for health insurance, taxing retirement benefits, recalculating cost of living for retirees, even though most have no Social Security, so therefore no COLA available, and even things like eliminating the partial tuition waivers for dependents of university employees, which is a good thing. And I think the most incredible of all that is the health care and health insurance fiasco of last week, and the incredible sad emails that I get from annuitants, particularly those who are out of state, who have been denied from their physicians and their clinicians treatment unless they pay up front, because they know of the reputation of the Illinois. This is not good. The CSRS Defined Benefit Program for university and community college employees was established in 1941. Most of you probably know that. When consistently funded, defined benefit programs are stable, affordable pension plans, especially for employees who do not participate in Social Security. Then they work. Pension funds require three funding components: the employer contributions, employee contributions, and the return on assets from fund investments. That makes it work. In most states, employer contributions are paid directly by the employing universities. So it's not the state, it's the university. In 1967, the state of Illinois assumed central responsibility for payment of employer contributions to the public pension systems, including the CSRS. By 1970, 3 years later, the likelihood that Illinois would not fulfill the funding requirements was already apparent, and Article 13 of the Constitution, the so-called Pension Protection Clause, thank God, was added to the state constitution. Since that time, Illinois' historical record of skipping, diverting, and delaying actuarially required pension fund payments is unrivaled throughout the nation. For CSRS participants, where retirement contributions replace Social Security, there is no retirement safety net. That's it, in the event of retirement benefits are not being paid by the state. So I suggest to you today that what we are experiencing now is a perfect example of the law of unintended consequences. We are now confronting the ramifications of policy decisions made by General Assemblies decades ago. Had the state allowed its public universities to retain the obligation of funding the nominal cost of our pension system, the employer cost, the 11%, had the state allowed public universities to retain that obligation, I maintain there would be no unfunded liability and we wouldn't be discussing this issue today. But it didn't happen. The state took over that obligation. So what we have today is the state's precarious fiscal situation has reached the point that policymakers have no choice but to make changes in pension funding. Speaker of the House Mike Madigan and Republican leader Tom Cross pledged to hold hearings on pension reform legislation over the summer. In a joint statement, they stressed, "We are absolutely committed to reforming Illinois' public pension system for current employees. It must be done to stabilize our systems and address long-term financial issues for both the public employee pension systems and state government." And I know from experience that when Speaker Madigan issues a joint statement with the Republican leader, change is in the wind. Ultimately, the courts will be the final arbiter as to whether any significant changes to employee pension plans are constitutionally legal. But I expect the legislature to approve some plan later this fall. In fact, changes were almost pushed through in the waning hours of this last spring session, if not for the determined opposition of individuals like you. It was people like you writing letters, making phone calls, sending emails that made legislators stop and rethink what could have been a series of very rash decisions. So, on behalf of my fellow university presidents around the state, I want to thank you for your efforts. They made a difference. We're very blessed to have such an active and informed group of annuitants that can mobilize in such times of need. And I appreciate all that you and the leadership of the State University's Annuitants Association have done to ensure that our legislators are aware of the plight of universities today. You are often our boots on the ground. We may not always win, but without you, these battles would never be waged. We will need you again this fall. Because I am certain that these issues will once again take center stage during the veto session. And we simply must get it right this time. We cannot afford to fail. I believe it's one of those historic moments. If you think about the past and the future of the great public higher education institutions in the state, this is the issue. And it's both an issue of for us, retirement income and health benefits, but it's also, to me, it's a moral issue. It's an issue of commitment. In my opinion, leaders in public higher education in Illinois must suggest viable alternatives that will address the very real financial distress confronting our pension systems. Once again, that's obvious. The thing is in financial distress. Some change has to take place. We can argue about the root cause, but the problem remains, and it is essential that higher education leaders put forth plans and options to help resolve this crisis. The answer to the state's pension problems should not result in diminished benefits, should not result in diminished benefits for you or for current employees. Before I conclude, I do want to acknowledge and thank Dr. Steve Cunningham, who is NIU's Vice President for Administration and Human Resources, and he's here with us, for his outstanding work behind the scenes analyzing and pointing out to the General Assembly the problems contained in the proposed pension legislation to date. He's our resident expert, and not only does he fight for NIU and staff, but he is also a resource to all the other universities, and he's well known. So Steve, we want to stand up. I want you to get some applause. You know, he's the human resource person, and I was listening to some of the commentary. The calls come in last week, and people are frantic. And, you know, they're not blaming the right people. It's not Sue's fault. It's not Sir's fault. It's not Steve Cunningham's fault. Well, normally it's not your fault. I'll let you know when it's your fault. So the future is ours to determine. All higher education, all the presidents are committed to finding a solution that is people-centered, whether those people are annuitants, current employees, or taxpayers of this great state. And I want to thank you for your leadership on this issue and for your commitment and what you've done to build higher education in this state. And also thank you for inviting me here to speak today. Let's keep up the fight, and that will help us ensure that our best days for our students and their families and our faculty and our staff and taxpayers of the state of Illinois are still ahead of us.